Welcome back to the Marvel Movie Minute, a daily podcast in which we explore the films of the Marvel Cinematic Universe 1 minute at a time. In this, our fourth season, we're looking at Kenneth Branagh's 2011 film, Thor. I'm Matthew Fox from theethicalpanda.com.
And I'm Andy Nelson from the Next Reel Film Podcast.
And today we're talking about minute 54, which begins with Frigga saying Odin always has a purpose, and ends with Jane skeptical that Thor can get his hammer back. Joining us today and all this week is Scott Carelli, founder of Dueling Genre Podcast Network and host of Franchisography. Scott, happy Thor's Day. We are here on Thursday, the day of Thor, and so we've been asking all of our guests, what is your favorite Thor moment? Like when you think of Thor as a character in the MCU or even from comic books, what's the moment that first comes to mind for you?
Oh, man. Wow. That's a really good question. Wow. I'm trying to think.
Andy, we really have to warn people about this.
That's right.
Yeah. I think I'm going to go with for some reason, the moment that sticks out to me is the, you're probably wondering how I got here moment from Ragnarok. Just because it's so silly and very Thor, and it's just a very, like, he finds himself in a very big situation, but is just kind of like tossing it over his shoulder of just like, yeah, you're probably wondering how I got here, you know? And it's a very Thor moment to me and just sort of like epitomizes the character.
I'm definitely with you there. I'm enjoying this movie. I think there's a lot of great moments for him throughout the series, but I definitely think Ragnarok is where they really figured out the sweet spot for Thor of like how much to use him for comedy versus how much to use him for the big epicness, and maybe he doesn't have to speak with exclamation points every single line of dialogue and things like that. So, well, we're going to have a lot to say about Thor in this minute in just one moment.
Have you ever heard of Patreon? Well, like so many podcasters out there, we are fans of their site, and we find it to be just a great platform for all of our fans to support us by becoming patrons. Well, we have now upgraded our site to Patreon's Memberful platform, which allows us to actually build our patron support platform right into our own site. So if you've been thinking about becoming a patron to show your love for the show, but you weren't sure about it as you can't find us on Patreon, just know that we are in fact using their platform. You can learn more about it at memberful.com. They make it so easy. Just visit truestory.fm/Marvel Movie Minute, and you can find out what we offer to our patrons. It's only $5 a month. And you can even get a discount if you join at the annual rate. Thanks.
So we start with Frigga finishing the thought she was having at the beginning of the last one, where she says, there's always a purpose to what your father does. And Loki does not look happy about this. And I'm wondering here, is this Frigga just kind of in general having good thoughts about this all? Or are we supposed to think that maybe actually Odin intentionally went into the Odinsleep? Because I certainly had the sense of it's kind of like, you know, my blood pressure got too high in a tense situation, I had a heart attack. But are we supposed to read that much into there's always a purpose to what your father does?
I always just took it as a sort of, I don't know, real world example of like God works in mysterious ways. Like that's kind of the vibe that I feel like is happening here. Only the difference is that God is like a literal person that is asleep on this bed. But that's always how I read it is it's like that. And I think that's why it upsets him so much, is because he's like, no, he's a person and he makes decisions and I want to know why.
Yeah.
I read it like she was very specifically referring to the comment she just made about Thor and how maybe we can get Thor back, this whole idea of Thor's banishment, and that she's saying there's a purpose to this whole thing with the banishment. And I have a feeling it's probably I feel like she's seeing it like there's a lot going on with this banishment that may be designed to do exactly really what the film does, is that it teaches Thor a lesson and he comes back a potential better ruler. And I think that Loki doesn't, my read is that Loki doesn't like hearing that, because it's like, I want to rule. I don't want Thor to come back.
I think that's very accurate. So before we kind of move on, let's talk about the deleted scene here. First, just kind of there's a whole second part of it that I think is so significant, but just starting with the one line that happens right before, she says the thing about the brother and Odin always having a purpose, where she says, you're a good son. And I just thought again, like, we don't need it necessarily, but it just added so much to both where she's coming from, but also I think to Loki getting some of the reassurance and validation that he's always wanted.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting elements in this particular scene about like these moments. And I mean, I really enjoy this scene. I don't think we needed it. I feel like they condensed it and we get a lot of kind of get all the talking points basically. But I enjoy those moments that we have here where you have that little bit that gives Loki something that he really, needed to hear from Frigga. Or perhaps also like the little bit that we get where they're talking a little bit more about the Odinsleep, and it gives us a little sense like he can hear you. He's just, he knows everything. It's all, I mean, they make it sound exactly like a coma, like he can hear you, you can talk to him, you can hold his hand and he'll feel it. Like it just totally feels like that. But it's like all of these moments, I think it's a nice scene. I don't think I needed the rest of it, but I like the way that, that at least it plays. I'm glad I got to see it.
Yeah, I think it's well put. I think I didn't need those additional stuff of the Loki and her conversation, but I definitely wanted, I think the next part of it, I'll describe it in just a second, is the first scene where I'm like, you know what, that would have made this a much stronger movie, because I think it would help correct some of the stuff we were just talking about a couple weeks ago. And for those who haven't seen it, it is a deleted scene where it's a continuation of this, where after they have that kind of nice moment together, the doors to the chambers open and a number of official-looking people come in, one of whom is holding Odin's staff. And Gungir, am I saying that right? Gungnir. And he kind of in this very ritualistic way goes to his knees and offers the staff to Loki. And when Loki looks kind of confused, he looks back to Frigga, his mother, who says, "You are part of the line of succession. Thor is banished. You are king." And she says this kind of beautiful line of Asgard is yours, and then actually ends it by saying, "My king." And I love this scene in part because I feel, well, I don't want to get into too many of my theories about it, but let me just hear from you all what you think of the scene, because I feel like it really helps to connect, for me, where Loki was to where we wind up seeing him.
I appreciate seeing it. And I think it's sort of like an interesting thing, because I think if this scene exists in this movie, the version of the movie that gets released in theaters, then I think that what becomes of Loki in Avengers, etc., I think that a lot of a lot of his desire for power, I feel like gets kind of deflated by him getting power here. It is given to him. And it's a perfect scene for a movie where Loki is a one and done villain only in this movie. But because we're talking about a character who has he just had a show that ended like a month ago or whatever it was, that to me feels like he can't ever have actually been given this power. It has to always be a situation where he is taking it and using his, trickster business.
That's fair.
And so like, I like the scene. I like experiencing it, but in the context of like the grander whole, I don't think it makes a lot of sense, and I'm glad they cut it.
Well, so here's an interesting question for you, because I think that's an interesting perspective that I hadn't really thought about. And I guess it's because we have a scene earlier where Loki is sitting on the throne when the Warriors 3 and Sif.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about. Yeah,
they come in to talk to him, and he's just like, he is saying, you need to listen to me because I am your king. So, I mean, from your perspective, then, is that like him just like playing it up as if he is, even though he's not?
Yeah, it feels like pontificating to me. Like it feels like he's putting on airs. And I think that's a more proper use of Loki, because what this scene is sort of showing is that he has earned the right to the seat on the throne. Whereas without this scene, that scene just looks like he was like, well, yeah, like I'm the next line in the thing. I deserve this. And that feels much more in line with the Loki that we get over the course of all of these. Cause like, you want him to learn that lesson way down the line, that like that's not how you get power. And I think that it only works if if this scene doesn't happen.
I hear what you're saying. And I think
Interesting.
one thing that's interesting when we look at the original script is a lot of these scenes were in different places in the original script. And I think, Andy, I'm glad you brought up that scene from before, because I think as I imagine it, this scene now would have had to happen before that scene where Loki has the staff and is talking to the Warriors 3 and Sif. And I think here's kind of an interesting question that the MCU has to wrestle with a lot, which is, what do you do for the sake of this movie versus what do you do for the sake of the Uber plot? Because I think you have me convinced that this helps for the Loki story. I think, though, for me at least, that scene that we saw of him, claiming the kingship, it just didn't strike me as, it didn't hit me as believable, because it was such a jump from where he was. And then this moment with Frigga is such a jump backwards that it's kind of like, I feel like this scene would have helped make this movie a lot better. But I also think you might be right that then it also does change. We now have Loki as such a sympathetic character that you're right. Maybe he's no longer it's not even possible to make him the villain by the end.
Right.
Yeah, it's there is a lot of interesting elements at play with that, and you can see where a decision like that I don't think, I don't know, but I don't know how far down the road Feige had been at this particular point. Like, as they were cutting this film, was that a conversation that he and Brana were having about, does it make sense, or was it just a conversation Brana said about, I think it's stronger if we don't have that in here. But I feel like obviously a decision like that is the sort of thing that really can have those ripple effects with all these other films and TV properties and everything down the road.
Yeah, I mean, I think they shoot a lot, and I think they figure out what they have in the edit, especially in these early films. And then, you have the planned reshoots for everything to like solve problems that you find in the edit as you're going along. I mean, even the deleted scene ends with a shot to like way earlier in the movie, right? And so like an establishing shot of the diner, I think, right? So
yeah, right.
Obviously this scene was going to be in a different place. It's funny that we referenced earlier, we were like, oh yeah, you do the sunset of the Arizona sunset and then you cut to the sunset on Asgard. But I actually don't think that that's where this was placed when it was, intact. So it is interesting that they obviously just shot a bunch of stuff. There's a version of this movie that is like whatever the assembly cut is, where it has this scene intact, probably before the throne scene. But they found a way to sort of like lean into Loki's sort of like snotty condescension and his desire for power a little bit more, because I think it sets him on a path of, it gives him more room to grow as a character in the long run. And I think that by the time they were probably in reshoots on this movie, they were like, oh, okay, Avengers is definitely going to happen and Loki is definitely going to be the villain of that movie. So we need to like figure out how to make that make sense. And I think cutting this scene was probably step one.
I think that makes a lot of sense, because one of the things that Andy and I have been going back and forth on throughout this entire movie is the idea of how much does Loki know what his end game is? How much of this has he plotted out moves 7, 8, 9, or is he just kind of stumbling along and realizing things are much better? And I think there's a strong case that on some level, he was always aiming at the throne as like, if everything falls into place, that's the end game. This scene, I think, would settle that debate. Like this scene, I think, unless he's an incredible actor as Loki, and I don't quite buy it for that moment, he seems so surprised that he could be king. And even there's that wonderful, very touching moment where even when he finally takes the staff, Gungnir, he will only touch it with his fingertips. He won't, like, for a while, even hold it in his hand. And I think, I can see again why that would maybe be a part of why you cut it as well, is because you want to be able to keep that tension. You want to, like, Hiddleston is doing such a great job of maybe I'm scheming, maybe I'm not, who knows? And this scene certainly would have obliterated that.
Right.
Especially with the end when he has that look, because that's just a straight up evil look.
Right.
Yeah.
Like he's full of maliciousness right now.
And then also may go to, and this, I don't know too much about Hollywood, but this is something I've heard of happening quite often, where you write a character one way, and then you get an actor who just so blows apart your expectations. Like, I could easily imagine, they got halfway through shooting Tom Hiddleston's scenes, and were like, you know what? This isn't we're going to keep this around, and we don't need to tell the audience what's happening. We're going to let him sell the possibilities.
Right.
I
also wouldn't be surprised if one of the things that they did in reshoots was scale him back from a sort of, you watch this deleted scene and Loki feels less schemy and more genuine and more just like, no, you're a jerk. You don't deserve this. You'd be a bad king. I would be a good king. Like, genuinely, I would be a good king. Not just like, I want power. I would be a good king. And I wonder if that wasn't the original intention. And then when they went into like reshoots and stuff, that's when they started reshooting his stuff to make him a little more snotty.
Yeah.
Because they wanted to sort of scale him back to like earlier in his character journey again to facilitate the future of the character. Because I do like in this movie how it does feel a little bit like he's flying by the seat of his pants and making a lot of mistakes, because he feels like a character that every time we see him, we meet him again, he's a little more calculated. And so you meet him in Avengers and he's a lot more calculating than he was in Thor. And then you meet him in the Dark World and he's even more calculating of like faking his death and taking over the throne by like pretending to be Odin. And like, it's like, it's machinations on machinations. And I think he's learning how to be this trickster god more and more as the story has progressed. But here, he's just sort of a petulant child. And that's the irony of them banishing Thor, is that Thor wasn't the petulant child. Loki was. And while like Thor, definitely had some growing to do, they really both needed to just be banished to the desert together to like work out their differences.
Some time with a therapist might have helped.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
And I think I really like what you're saying there, Scott, especially because one thing Andy and I talked about earlier is some of the other cut scenes, some of the other scenes that have been deleted were ones in which Thor is even more of a jerk. And I commented at one point, like, if you kept in too many of these scenes, I would find it really, we'd pass a point where I'm like, I no longer want to see Thor redeemed. He's just terrible. And I think maybe that it's the same kind of thinking. Like, they might have looked at the first cut of the movie and been like, people are going to want Loki to be the hero of this movie. This is not like, we need to kind of make Loki a little less sympathetic and Thor a little more sympathetic and kind of sell it that way.
Yeah. I think they could have easily stepped into Black Panther territory in terms of like, oh, I totally understand where this guy is coming from, and maybe he's right. And I think that's not what you want, especially this early on. You don't want that complex of a hero-villain situation when you're literally introducing your hero this early on in this shared universe.
Yeah, especially at this point, like you said. I mean, this is only the fourth film in this universe. And so, yeah, it's so early on, they don't want to make a misstep because obviously they had big plans.
Because even there, I mean, they do some level of and maybe I'm in the minority here, but certainly I don't know anything about if Loki would be a good king. I've very much been sold on the idea that Thor would be a terrible king at this point in time, with what he saw with Odin. Yeah. So there's definitely, when Loki says, look at him, he can't be king, we at least believe that. I think you're right. We need to be careful not for that to go even further.
I'm still convinced that if this movie hadn't happened, whether Loki ended up being adopted by Odin and Frigga or not, I still think we would have ended up with Party Thor that we saw in What If, right. And I think that no matter what, it would have been a problem. So
yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
I really hope that somewhere on the internet there's, a log of Tom Hiddleston and Chris Hemsworth chats where Tom is like, yeah, I was in your movie, huh? Now I have my own TV show. How's that going for you?
So one last thing I wanted to bring up here that again, another reason why I shouldn't be here, because this person, I'm just going to say that he's the Einherjar sage because he looks like the sort of person that would be a sage, bald with a lot of hair on the back of his head. but he's carrying Gungnir. And again, going back to the conversations we've had about Gungnir, theoretically, at least in the comics, Gungnir can only be held by Odin. Now, we've already broken that because we saw Loki holding Gungnir when he was on the throne. But again, that makes me think that it's this weapon that only the ruler can wield. And now it's just this random person carrying Gungnir. So again, another reason why I'm glad that this scene isn't in here.
That's fair. I will be the lone defender of the scene, but you convinced me why there's a good argument for it at least. Well, I've joked at other points that the Asgard story is so good that it's hard for me to cut back to New Mexico. But we're about 20 minutes into this podcast, and we spent most of the time talking about the first 7 seconds of the minute. So we probably should get back to New Mexico. So we cut back there, and as I said, now it is night, and we've talked about how long a drive it is. And I do like that, you have this great shot of going up the road and then back down into the crater. And one thing I noticed is, Scott, I don't know if you rewatched these scenes, but Andy, you and I were talking about it not long ago. We just saw a scene where the Warriors 3 have to go up a flight of stairs to then look kind of down into the throne room. And to me, it might just be it's a fun kind of shot to do, but this felt very similar to that.
Yeah.
Well, not only that, but I mean, this is an exact repeat of the shot when JMS actually drives his truck to the crater, right?
Yeah.
We have the exact same shot where we're following his vehicle. We come right over the top and see it. So I love the way that they're finding ways to kind of bring that symmetry in wherever they can.
I will say this has to be one of the least impressive military operations I've ever seen. I mean, it comes over and the music is like, wow, amazing, right? I'm like, it's like a hamster setup. Like I like,
yeah,
it's so unimpressive, and it's so funny that we're only like 2 movies away from a helicarrier, and like this is where they're at right now. It's just like this pretty weak setup.
Well, I mean, to their defense, it was set up in less than 12 hours, so it was a very quick setup. And so my hunch is they designed it to look like something that could be set up quickly. Mm-hmm. But also, to your point, it does feel like it's something that you'd probably see more in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. rather than in later MCU films.
It was something like 12 hours in WandaVision, and that was a much more impressive camp
That's
setup.
Very true.
Yeah.
the only thing, and again, I seem to be the king of headcanoning these days, but... Because I look at all that piping, especially the kind of like above ground tunnels, and I just don't get it. Mm-hmm. And the only explanation I could come up with is it would seem like those offer some kind of containment, and maybe they do believe that things are radioactive, or maybe they just know they've told people it's radioactive, and so they want it to look scary. You know, they don't want the press driving up. They don't want more people coming by to see it, and so they're trying to make it look like we're all in security stuff, and like if you come near, you're going to get zapped by the radiation, because you don't need all that tubing. You can just walk around. It's okay.
Right. Because why is the spot where Mjolnir is, why is it like in open air? Like, why isn't it in a tent or something? Like, why is it open to the sky? Like, I just don't, do they know what it is? Do they know that it can attract lightning? And that's the reason why? Are they trying to lure Thor out because they like want whoever the hammer belongs to know where the hammer is so they can get them too? Or like, what's the situation here? What's their plan?
Some of that falls to that whole Doyleist or Watsonian type of storytelling where it's like, it's here because they need Thor to be with the hammer and the rain is coming down on him. And it's like, yeah, but that doesn't, like, in context of the way the story works, it doesn't make any sense to me. But yes, it's just the writers needing to do it that way. And so it ends up making it that much more frustrating.
So we do get that kind of cool God's eye shot from the top. And they do this fun thing where you're just sort of spiraling around the hammer, seeing a bunch of people walking around. Most of them look like they're in techie suits of some kind, but one person is just in a suit. And I believe, at least according to the script, that's supposed to be Coulson.
Well, it looks like an African-American to me. Like, I feel like
okay, I didn't
see the head.
But
I mean, and I think that, just we're going to have to start delineating these people as we move forward. So I think that we call anyone who's in a suit an agent. Anyone who's like, in the white outfit, they're going to be the scientists. And I guess the specifically like the people who are agents but who are working on the computers, I guess we'll call them techies, because that seems to be the delineation in the script and
That's
in
fair.
the credits. So just so that we can try to sort this out as we talk through all these people who are wandering around here, because there are a lot.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of people here in this one little place, but nobody's at the road. But anyway.
Right. So we go back to Jane and Thor, and he's taking off his jacket and offering it to Jane. And she says, wait, why do I need this? And then we hear thunder. First of all, he just doesn't want to have a bright colored jacket on, I think, because he's going to try and be stealthy. But I think the clear indication is supposed to be that he knows that like thunder and like lightning and rain is going to be coming soon. Is this because he knows that happens when he gets close to Mjolnir, or that he thinks that will happen when he flies away? Like, is that just a coincidence moment, or is it because he's getting close to Mjolnir and so there's thunder? What do you think is happening there?
I think he's the god of thunder, and he knows when it's going to rain. I mean, I think that it's as simple as that. That's how I always read it. But yeah, it could also be coming from his own feeling of like, well, I mean, I'm going to get Mjolnir, and then, the lightning's going to come because I'm going to be Thor again, buddy. And so, he's just feeling very confident about his chances of being able to pick up Mjolnir.
And we did hear, I mean, there was a lightning flash and thunder rumbling when we were on that God's eye view looking down on Mjolnir. So it's entirely possible that he already had heard the thunder and saw the lightning, and Jane didn't. So
that can make sense.
Yeah.
And so then there's this great back and forth where Thor offers a deal. He says, once I have it, you'll get everything. And she just doesn't think it's possible. She has no idea how he's going to do this.
Yeah, it's funny. And this is another moment where I think that the writers for the script really found great opportunities to bring comedy in, because it plays well, like this moment. And we're kind of breaking up the joke across these 2 minutes, but it is pretty funny the way that it ends up playing, and it works well. My only question with it is that, or I don't even know if it's a question, but I think it's funny how, Thor, like he has the smoothest, charming ability. Like, he sold his friends on this invasion of Jotunheim on the stupidest things earlier in the film. Like, I gave you all the greatest food ever. And the Volstags, yeah, that was great. Let's go start a war. Like, it's so silly. And here he's doing the exact same thing with Jane, where he's just totally giving her this smooth, charming talk. And Jane instantly is just like, no. And I don't know. I find that really funny. And maybe it's just because I've been watching so many of these minutes so much, but I just found that turn on Thor, even though he doesn't react, like he doesn't get deflated from her no, but I just found that to be such a funny no, especially the way that Natalie Portman delivered it.
I also just like it from the perspective of just like, no, don't implement me like in this plan. Like, that's not, I'm not going to be implicated. This is your thing. You go do the thing, but I am not giving you my approval.
Yeah, because we saw her earlier when they were all taking all of her stuff. She thought it was wrong, but she wasn't like, I'm going to break in and steal it back. So I'm going to sue you. Like, She's still thinking in terms of like the official systems, not in terms of, let's go rogue quite as much.
Right.
Well, it makes me wonder, like, what was her intention then on coming out here? I mean, was she just, because I guess, the initial intention was just to give him a ride. So yeah, I guess what was she thinking would happen?
I don't think she knows. I think she just wants to see. I think she's curious.
Yeah.
Her curiosity is just getting the best of her.
Yeah.
I think also she probably had no idea it was this intense. She knew that a couple of town drunks had come in and said, the feds told us to leave.
Right.
Like, that could have been one car, and then the feds drove off 20 minutes later, and so now the hammer is still just sitting there in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
Definitely.
So I think it's about all we have for this minute, at least from my end. Any other last things you two wanted to bring up?
Nope. Good minute. Can't wait to see what happens next.
Awesome. Well, Scott, we've talked about a number of the projects you do. Is there anything else we haven't yet gotten a chance to talk about you want listeners to know about?
Oh, yeah. So I'm also a big theme park fan, and I have a podcast called Theme Park This, which comes out every other Thursday, Theme Park Thursday, or Theme Park Thursday, as the case may be.
Hey, there you go.
And it is a podcast where myself and my co-hosts, Brian and Kyle, take a subject concept or IP, and then we talk about how we would turn it into a theme park. It's a very like silly sort of armchair Imagineering kind of thing, but we have a lot of fun with it, and I adore those guys, and I love doing that show. I love theme parks and love the idea of turning anything and everything into a theme park. We did an episode on the MCU shortly after Avengers Campus opened because we're like, I think we could do better. So we did an episode on that, and then we definitely have an Asgard land amongst lots of other stuff in our Marvel Studios episode. So maybe check out that episode and then see if any of the other subjects strike your fancy.
One more great thing to check out. I have to say, Scott, normally by this point, by the end of the week, I'm like, all right, what can I find as a new way to get the host talking? It's great when the guest is doing 8 million things because it makes my job easier. So thank you, Andy. Thank you so much to all of our fans. Thank you, and have a great day.
Until next time, true believers.
Marvel Movie Minute is a production of True Story FM, engineering by Andy Nelson. This season's music is One Last Ride by Martin Puringer. Find the show at truestory.fm, and if your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, consider doing that for this show.